So hello everyone, my name is María Naidich and I'm here with Alexander. We're gonna have a conversation about our work for Sociedad Volcánica. This is organized by Studio David Pompa for the Art Week in Mexico City. So I would like to maybe start by asking you, Alexander, just to give us a little bit of an intro, like a general intro about your practice.
Sure, absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm honored to get to speak a little bit about my work. Um, my training and background and focus is all in literary fiction, which is kind of a broad way to describe a kind of writing that is based in storytelling, and I would say a certain focus on language. Trying to use poetics as a way to tell uh, narratives or stories that are compelling with more of a philosophical or conceptual approach than something that's genre related. So, it's not science fiction, it's not fantasy. It can use those elements. Um, that's really what my background is. That's what I've studied. That's what I work on. But as an extension of that, I've been really fortunate to be able to apply my skill set in a variety of different places. Um, I just finished working for quite a few years at a technology company where I was part of the team that told the story of the company to the public, and being able to take the arts practice of how we deploy language and how we structure ideas and apply it to something that has a much different purpose or goal than art has been a really interesting opportunity. And then similarly with Studio David Pompa, when they asked me to write a little something about the Cantera stone that they used in their Milan exhibition last year, it gave me an opportunity to again think about language and structure and storytelling as a way to really help highlight and emphasize the work that they do, which was a really fun and interesting challenge.
Yeah, nice. I really loved your text from that from this cantera thing with Studio David Pompa. It's
Thank
super
you. Thank
nice.
you.
Yeah, I really like it. And I was actually very curious about because I guess there's some fiction in there, but I can really imagine it's you talking. And I was actually wondering um because you said your dad is a geneticist.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I was just thinking how interesting is that he's probably very hard science into that scientific world, and you're into fiction, creative writing. And I was
Sure.
wondering how is that, because growing up in this environment, because there's a part of the text where you talk about this microscope thing
Mhm.
that you and you observe things, and I think it's such a beautiful relation on this scientific view and then your imagination as a kid and as a a writer too. So yeah, I'm just curious because I have a completely different background, so I'm just wondering how that can influence or not in your what you do right now,
Yeah,
this.
absolutely. Um, I think the first thing I would say, thank you, first of all, for the feedback, but I think the first thing I would say is one of the biggest not misconceptions, but like assumptions that I think people bring to the idea of literary fiction is that it is invented, that it's made up, which is, literally what fiction means. But the art form has reached a point where the idea of invention isn't really the point anymore. It's more about how you structure ideas and how you weave them together. So if I don't know if you're familiar with like the writer W.G. Sebald, who wrote in a much more essayistic way, and there are elements of fiction in there that he uses structure, but the real texture of his writing is tends to all be based in fact. And he was active, tragically died 20 or so years ago. But from him and a lot of like other movements at the time, a lot of fiction has changed today, where it's less about invention and more about how do you present ideas in a compelling way that feels like a story. And so being able to pull from your own life, using that as a structure, and then it's hard to explain like where the line is. I don't even know sometimes between nonfiction or memoir and what is fiction. I think it has more to do with what engages the reader and where the momentum from the text comes from.
Right.
And I think on the flip side, and to your point, in coming from a family that had like a hard science background, I think a lot of the best scientists or mathematicians or people working in engineering, if they're really thoughtful about their craft, there's a lot of interplay back and forth between how they're being creative to approach ideas, the elegance with which they state their ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I remember my dad telling me once that Watson and Crick, the scientists who discovered the double helix structure in DNA, the real elegance of their discovery was they wrote their proof in one page. One of the most groundbreaking discoveries in the history of biology, but
Yeah.
they expressed it in a single page, and that just really emphasizes how important structure is. But it's funny you bring this up because I wanted to ask you about something similar when I was looking at your work and the way that you really integrate natural forms and natural textures. I saw a video on your Instagram. I think it was of you standing on a rock and using molten glass. Is that you in the video?
Yeah, that's me. Yes.
Yeah, I really loved the way that you use the imprint of the rock, which just a natural random form, as a basis for an object that you made. And so I
Yeah.
was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how much just like natural, like organic shape informs the kind of work you want to make. Is that part of like where you start to get your ideas, or do you go out looking for things and you find it, or how do you integrate those things into your work?
Well, it's like I think it happens like in a very organic way. I'm actually like very interested. Like it's quite funny you mentioned this rock because what I like about that piece, or what I was interested about that piece, is like the imprint of a rock that was, because I couldn't take the rock, of course. Like I just like
Right.
a bubble of glass on top of a rock. And what I like about that piece is that it's just the glass and the imprint of the rock. So like this mark, like this kind of trace of this object or being, that is not longer there. So that's something I really like to explore. So bodies, like different bodies that are not there anymore.
Hmm.
And that also allows, like, give us like this possibility of imagining, like somehow related to fiction too. Like you can
Hmm.
speculate what was the body that was there, what's this trace, and that's something I find super interesting. That's why my work is very much influenced with archaeology too, more in that way, not in the like strict scientific methodologies of archaeology, but more like
Sure.
these, like maybe even philosophical ideas. And like now that we were talking about this thing of fiction, like you were sharing these your personal story with science and fiction, I just remember at one point I was reading some fragments of the Charles Darwin's diaries.
Sure.
And I was, of course, focused on the section about the fossils. And I remember like I think he was traveling in the coast of Ecuador, in the Pacific.
Hmm.
And then I remember reading somewhere else that while he was observing the coasts and like the rocks, he started like that's when he started his theory about the age of the world, of the earth,
Hmm.
because he was seeing the different like geological like how do you say this, capas, like the
Like
different,
the
yeah,
layers. Yeah.
the layers. And then he could imagine, like he imagined before there was water there, while observing the rock. So I think there's a very important relation between like these scientific theories or these like discoveries with relation with imagination, you know, because you need to imagine first to be able to recreate a different situation or reality. So that's why I find it really, I don't know if this is a bit confusing actually, but
No, I'm following perfectly.
okay, cool. So that's why I also like find it really, really nice, this part in the text where you're doing where you mention how stone is actually quite impermanent, and that when you yeah, when you mentioned the telescope, the James Webb Space Telescope and the light, like I found that so beautiful. Maybe for the people who will watch these and haven't read the text, like, can you share more on that?
Sure. Speaking to Andrea at Studio David Pompa and thinking about this combination of the stone the studio was using as the basis for this design, I guess, project, or the phase that the studio was working on. It was really like, I had this thought process where I thought, okay, the stone is a record of something really ancient and old. And that's what really strikes you first about it, because you see these layers, these strata that you're talking about. And it's almost like an instant visual record of the age of, like, on a geological scale, you know, going back thousands, millions of years. But at the
Yeah,
same time, what they're using that stone to make are light fixtures. And so there's this like really interesting marriage between something really solid and then something totally intangible and light. And it occurred to me that um, there's this paradox where something is solid and ancient, but then the actual oldest thing in the universe, when the James Webb telescope was launched a couple of years ago, I followed it really closely because I found the astronomy aspect really interesting. And the first really powerful thing that the James Webb telescope did was observe the oldest traces of our universe. And the way it did that was find the light traveling from the farthest corners. And so this idea that something that is impermanent is actually the most ancient thing that we can possibly see.
yeah,
And yet it's you know, there's no solidity to it. And then it's paired with something that seems to be really old, but in comparison, you know, it's the stone is just a speck in time compared to this light traveling across the universe.
yeah,
Um,
so
and
amazing.
I don't think there's like a big takeaway there, but it's there's something provocative in the intersection of those ideas.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. I also think like these things are also like questioning the way we think about time, about the world, about like that's, I don't know, yeah, like a little bit like this paradox between two elements and materials, and yeah, how actually a stone, it's quite impermanent, and light, it's like the oldest matter that can yeah, like about the existence of.
And something else I think is interesting about this is these observations, these facts aren't necessarily useful. They're not like facts that you can do something with. It's not like understanding the double helix of DNA. Then you go and you can, like, you know, 50 years later, do genetic tests. It's just it's information that's interesting, but then there's an aesthetic element to it. And I think you do something with this in your work. I think Studio David Pompa does something with this in their work, where there's ideas that they almost reach their limit of usefulness, but
Mhm.
there's still an aesthetic, beautiful, thought-provoking aspect to it, and then figuring out how to turn that into an object and kind of crystallize those aesthetics is a really interesting project, and really cool to see in your work.
Nice, thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, I'm actually like something I wanted to mention is that, sorry, I need to erase this. I don't know if it's, yeah. Yeah, that's something important in my work. It's also like, for example, I have a project called Piedras Blandas, and it was like a fictitious archaeological site of a place that actually doesn't exist. And I was like, it's like a quite complex project, but something I did over there was like a catalog with all the beings and objects and things that existed in that fictitious place. And I renamed them. I put just different like taxonomies or nomenclatures for things. And that's something I also that's something that interests me quite a lot. And I think like the Sociedad Volcánica like gathers a lot of that like science actually like made up this whole organization of organize the world, if you know what I mean. Like there's like so much of a colonial implication in the way the world it's divided. Like, okay, the plants belong to these kind of worlds, and the stones to this one, and the animals, and you know, like these from Linneo, like these taxonomies from Linneo, which I mean, for sure they're cool, but I'm also wondering like what happens if we erase those kind of like boundaries and start like conceiving the world in a more like ecological way. Like, yeah, and what I mean with ecological is like how even a stone, it's impacting in the life of a plant or the soil, or like, you know, like more. And that's something that I also like, that I read in your text. Like you say, like in this part, that science has also like brought us these ways of looking, like has impacted in the way we look, like how we look, you know.
Yeah.
So like that you can see like cells, and it's like an observation tool. And I'm
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just wondering, like, if that's the way we should look, like so literal, or shall we look at things in a different way? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question that spans a lot of different disciplines and different professions and different philosophies. I think this idea of how do you categorize information, and then how that categorization forces people to then see the world and treat the world has a lot of problems, but also has a really powerful usefulness to it. I mean, the natural world is infinitely varied, right? Like I think the Cantera stone is a good example. You look at any number of pieces, and there's going to be no two pieces that look the same. That's just a basic function of how the stone is formed. It's like a random assortment of shapes and textures and things based on the heat and the velocity from when it was formed.
Yeah.
But if you're dealing with that much variety and that much information, you can't do anything with it. You can't name every stone its own name because it is unique in itself. You have to categorize it at a certain point. And once you have that categorization, you then have a way to deal with the information. But I mean, you mentioned colonialization earlier. Like that's one place where it becomes problematic when you start simplifying people or cultures. There's a superficial usefulness to that, but at a certain point, then it becomes a tool for oppression or stereotyping or grouping people along lines that they shouldn't be. Same thing, I mentioned like fiction genres earlier, sci-fi, fantasy, literary fiction. There are superficial similarities between all of those things, but if you look at a piece of art, a book, and reduce it to just its label or its genre, you're probably going to miss some of the redeeming factors of it.
Mhm.
So and the part of the text that you quoted is one place where I think science plays a really critical role in that. And before we observed the atom and somebody explained to the rest of the world, like, this is the atomic structure, nobody would view the world that way. But once that information was discovered and broadcast, all of a sudden this whole cascading flow of new ideas came out. That was really powerful, but it took a certain framework for the information to be simplified and categorized and labeled.
Mhm.
And so I guess to answer your question, I think it's a compromise between the two things. You have to be able to stay flexible to see like the unique aspects of any individual unit that you're looking at, but at the same time, um, there has to be a point where uh, you're willing to use those labels or those categories as a way just to like simplify the world. And actually, like, so in your work, when you have these very mechanical forms, so like in the images that I know you produce that are being put into posters as part of the you've really married like the imagery that is very mechanical, like there's scan lines in images, but the objects themselves are very natural. So it tells me that you're also thinking a lot about um like mechanical reproduction, the way that things look the same, the way that like the human influence puts things into very strict forms and structures. But at the same time, the thing that you're fitting into those forms and structures are natural, organic, not controlled or uniform
Mhm.
pieces. Is
Yeah.
that something you intentionally try to put together, or like what is the interest that you have in those balances?
Yeah, like with that work, with this collaboration, it's been like super interesting because it comes from like an artwork that I have of a collection of objects that it's like an artistic collection, right? Like I just collect matter and objects and things that I found, or like I test with glass for bigger works. So I ended up having like a huge collection of these little things that I actually didn't know what they were, because of course I don't have like this scientific approach. So it's like no sense of trying to categorize things into those logics. But I realized, and that this is recent, like I think last year, it's something I realized, that I'm very interested in matter that mutates.
Hmm.
I don't know if that's like the right word in English, but I'm interested in in matter that fluctuates between being solid and liquid. And of course, like I work with glass, and that's like one of the big characteristics of this material, at least when you like transform it in an artistic or like handcraft way. Like you need to heat it up and melt it, so it's like this viscosity kind of thing, and then it like crystallizes, and it's like hard. So then that's something I'm really interested in. And this collection of materials I have, it's called líquidos mutantes, so liquids, mutating liquids, kind of. And what I did, it's like taking this kind of aesthetic from like science or even archaeology or geology, of like sampling or like portraying each material, like in
Mhm.
this very like um sterile kind of way, sterile, or like very, yeah, like as you said, like same, it's actually a scan, you
Right,
know.
sure. Yeah, you can
It's
see the lines on the image, which is really cool.
exactly, so it's just like digitalizing those objects. And the second part of that work is this collection of images of objects. I created a label for each object, where instead of saying, okay, this is glass with a little bit of iron, and no, what I'm doing, or I collected these from when I was walking on the beach, and no, like what I'm doing, it's just a narrative, like a kind of poetic, a very anarchist poetic narrative on how this matter it's fluctuating from liquid to solid. So the idea, it's like this, the first piece, it's like a kind of a drop, and how the drop, it's getting like other beings in the drop, the liquid drop, and it's becoming something like not so transparent anymore, and out of a sudden it's like becoming a bone, and the bone, it's turning into a stone, and the stone wants to be a metal, so then it becomes shiny. So that's it. That's the idea of that work. So as I mentioned before, I'm interested in these, like the categorization of objects, and also
Sure.
like these, like the vitrines, for example. That's something I talked a lot with Andrea before. Like, are we talking about the vitrines because of vitrines, or how do you say it? Vitrines? Like
Um, like the what?
like where in museums they put in glass.
Oh, the case, like a case, or the
Yeah.
like the actual display case that it's inside. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just making up the word in
No,
English.
that's okay.
In Spanish, it's vitrina. That's why I was like the vitrines, but no,
Oh, interesting. Okay.
the glass cases. So there's a certain way of looking at objects when you just encapsulate things in a case, in a glass case, and you're looking at it, like how we
Yeah.
look, how we actually look at it. It tells a lot about how we conceive the world. So I'm just like,
Well, I wanted to ask you about that actually. So when I was looking at your work, not about that specifically, but I noticed that there's a lot of layers to how your work is presented. So there's the object itself, there's the gallery space, or just the space in which it is placed. Then there's the photographs that you take of it, and then there's the posters that it's eventually printed on. And each of those has a different presentation and thoughtfulness and intentionality that goes into it. And I was wondering, when you're working on a new piece or a new project, do you think about all of those different aspects from the very beginning, or does it kind of cascade from one to another? Like maybe you start with the object, then you have the idea for the space, and the space gives you an idea for the photos or the videos, then that gives you an idea for how to print it. Or does it change from project to project?
yeah, it is really different, and it's always like just happening during the process of working. Like I do imagine things, and then I try to achieve it, but it's more like I'm doing something, and that brings me to another decision about space, about how it feels,
Mm.
about how it looks. And that's something that happens too with the collaboration we have with Studio David Pompa. I mean, this work I just told you about, the collection,
Mhm.
is something I had. And then what we did, it's like I put it in some of the pieces from their materials, so the cantera, because of course it's so related to, it has so much glass in it. It's like this vibrant matter, like there's, as you say, like a whole world in there. And then, I mean, we imagined something, and then it turned it out like being something different. And that's also something I really like, that we can take decisions and adapt our ideas to the best solution depending on what we're doing at that moment.
Sure.
So yeah, so that's how it's actually working. And that's also something I'm trying to do. Like, we're just doing on the way and experimenting, and sometimes it doesn't work, that's right, but sometimes it does. So I like to take those kind of risks of trying out things.
Sure. So it's not just the material that mutates, but it's the process too. That's cool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's very cool. Um, I was also curious. I've never worked with glass before. That seems like a amazing, impossible thing to me. I was wondering if there's any technical aspect of your work that you're most proud of or most interested in, because it's so easy to talk about the ideas, but like for me, even on the writing, which is much less physical, like the technical side is what really gets me engaged. So I was wondering if working with glass, working with these materials, if there's a certain technique or a certain physical process that you find especially exciting.
Mhm. Yeah, like such a nice question, because before I was working very much like I have an idea and I'm gonna find the best solution, the best material to materialize that idea. And for the past 2 years, that changed. Like the process with the material, it's telling me what to do. Like I'm very interested in the actual manipulation of matter.
Mm.
So like I've been working with clay, like with ceramics,
Mm.
and for sure the hot glass sculpture is like my ultimate thing. It's so amazing. Like I had the opportunity last year to work in a hot shop in Washington at the Pilchuck Glasgow, and then you
Cool.
literally like take hot glass and manipulate it with your hand, like with a pipe, and that's such an amazing learning on the material has a way of moving itself, a way of like almost agency. Like if you don't spin the cane, it will fall, and it has like a specific way of moving. So learning like the characteristics of the material through the process of making, it's been like just very revealing as an artist that used to work more on ideas.
Yeah,
So
amazing. Is there any
yeah.
material or technique that you haven't gotten to work with that you hope you do?
Yeah, a lot. Actually, I'm not specialized on any material at all. I mean, I do glass, but I was more trained on like conceptual art, or for example, the art school I went to, it was more about ideas than actually making.
Sure.
I would love to try stone, like
Mm.
sculpted stone.
Sure. Yeah.
Think that's like, wow, people who know how to do that are just like in different kind of level of, I don't know, it's just amazing.
Yeah. There's my wife and I moved to Paris about a month and a half ago, and it's just amazing walking around the city and seeing the stone sculptures all over the place that have been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it's, yeah, there's something really beautiful about living around these art objects that are made of, again, this ancient, seemingly
Yeah,
permanent, but maybe not actually permanent material that's all around us, which I really appreciate.
amazing, beautiful, nice. Okay, Alexander, I think like I would love to continue just talking with you, but we're running out of time.
Likewise, me too.
Yeah, I think we need to like wrap up. But like thank you so much for like this time, and like for sharing your work, your ideas, and
Yeah,
everything.
likewise, same with you. And it's been my pleasure. I just love talking about these things. So yeah, let's keep talking sometime. That'd be great.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you, you too. Thanks, Maria.
See you. Have a good day.
You too.